My name is Bob Strike. Since the mid-1960s, I have served as an attorney to the Valentine and Karleen families. After Karleen died in 1982, Ruth Karleen approached me about the possibility of establishing a charitable trust to provide medical scholarships in honor of her husband and her father, Walter Valentine. She indicated that she wanted Dave Perrin, Scott Helferty, and me to serve as trustees. Ruth structured the trust so that approximately 20% of the trust's income would be used to support the Valentine scholars, and 80% of the trust income would be dedicated to provide Karleen scholars. Ruth believed that the trust could provide substantial assistance to students at the University of Minnesota Medical School, as well as other medical schools, in order to reduce the ever-increasing debt load that medical students were incurring. Ruth stipulated that all scholarship applicants should be Minnesota residents, and that the Valentine portion of the trust be earmarked for students who were from rural Minnesota and were giving serious consideration to practicing medicine in small towns in rural areas as her father had. The trust was activated after Ruth's death, which occurred in February of 1999. In the immediate months following her death, the trustees worked to establish responsible financial oversight, and to collaborate with the Minnesota Medical Foundation to select scholarship recipients. We were able to grant our first scholarships to a first and second year student in the fall of 2001. We are pleased that the trust has grown and has benefited a number of worthy recipients, and we're gratified that some of the early recipients of the scholarship are now in the practice of medicine. Finally, we are convinced that the Valentines and Karleens would have been thrilled to meet those of you who have received a scholarship in their names. We hope this presentation will introduce you to our donor and to the values she and her family embodied in the scholarship fund.
Hello, my name is David Perrin, and I am one of 3 trustees who oversee the Valentine Karleen Medical Scholarship Trust. Robert Strike and Scott Helferty, the other 2 trustees, and I wanted to offer you a glimpse into the lives of Walter Valentine and Conrad Karleen. The pictures of their families and friends are taken from a collection of thousands of slides, which will at times not match with the text of this video. However, we hope that you will sense their highly ethical commitment to the practice of medicine, as well as their delight in the work to which they were called. I am the only grandson of the Valentines and the only nephew of Ruth Karleen, and so I was provided a unique vantage point to witness their commitment and dedication to not only the practice of medicine, but their communities as well. As the years go by, my appreciation of my grandfathers and uncles' caring, personal dedication to their patients grows. My grandfather is still remembered fondly by many people living in Tracy, Minnesota. He not only lived and practiced there for 63 years, but was active in the community through the school board, volunteer fire department, and church council. After his death, my grandmother donated his medical office to the city, where it has served as a city library for 40 years. Similarly, my Uncle Con received numbers of letters from patients over the years, thanking him for how his delicate surgical expertise, especially facial reconstruction, changed immeasurably the quality of their lives. Dr. Val, as my grandfather was affectionately known, graduated in the first 4-year class at the University of Minnesota Medical School in 1900. Later that year, he opened his medical practice in Tracy, doing it with quiet reserve. He refrained from advertising during his entire career and built his medical practice by word of mouth. You might wonder why he chose to locate in Tracy. It's important to note that at the beginning of the 20th century, far more people lived in rural areas in the United States than in cities. Tracy was an up-and-coming small town of almost 2,000 persons and was the second largest town in all of southwestern Minnesota. Tracy boasted 3 weekly newspapers and was a division point on the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. There was daily express train service to Chicago and the Black Hills, and the economy of the town prospered as long as the railroad centered its operations there. He married my grandmother in 1901, and together they raised 2 daughters, Helen, my mother, and Ruth. It's difficult now to imagine that there was a time when more physicians chose to practice medicine in small towns and rural areas than in cities, but this was true until the mid-1920s. Dr. Val was a natural fit for a small town. He himself had grown up on a farm near Cannon Falls, Minnesota. His outgoing, gregarious nature connected easily with the city folk of Tracy and farm folk alike. His patients were people he knew as friends, colleagues, and neighbors for decades. There probably was not a person in the region who did not know his name. He sought to offer the highest standards of medical care and regarded his patients as human beings and not mere customers. He knew how important it was to keep current with developments in medicine, and so he pursued continuing education his whole career, including some time at Harvard Medical School. One significant part of my grandfather's legacy was the construction of the new, modern Tracy Hospital in 1938. This facility was fireproof and incorporated 2 surgery rooms and 35 beds in rooms and wards. This building still functions as a well-maintained senior nursing facility. Dr. Val assumed a number of civic leadership responsibilities, perhaps most notably being his 27-year chairmanship of the school board. My grandfather saw his medical practice in terms of being readily available to the community. I remember the presence of a telephone next to my grandfather at the dinner table. When the phone would ring, he would frequently need to leave in order to respond to the needs of a patient in town or even miles out in the country. My grandfather's dedication to the practice of medicine also extended to bringing young physicians into his practice where he'd mentor them. He shared with them not only the science of medicine, but the art of patient care as well. 2 of the young physicians that he mentored were Dr. Ken Halferty and Dr. Karleen. I'm pleased and proud to share this family history with you. For me, the lives of my grandfather and my aunt and uncle demonstrate a set of values that we hope to transmit to the recipients of the Valentine and Karleen Scholarships, and through you to the medical profession at large and to the patients that you're privileged to serve. The explosion of medical knowledge and technology carries with it the risk of impersonal delivery of medical services. Our goal is to assist all of you in meeting the challenge of obtaining medical degrees. We hope that the examples set by my grandfather and uncle will inspire you to incorporate their values of dedication and commitment to a personal and meaningful service to your profession and your patients.
This is Scott Helferty, and I am one of the 2 other trustees who oversee the Scholarship Trust. The Helferty connection with the Valentines began when my father started his medical practice with Dr. Val in 1935. I remember well hearing my dad recall how he and Dr. Val would travel around Lyon County on treacherous winter nights to deliver babies at home. They were always available to provide medical care whether or not the patient could pay for services rendered. It was during the 6 years Dad worked for Dr. Val that a lifelong friendship developed with the Valentine family and the Karleens. The Valentine's 2 daughters, Helen and Ruth, both had left Tracy by the time my dad began working there. However, when both daughters married in 1940, my parents began a long friendship with both couples that continued until 1999, when Ruth Karleen died. We really do not know when and how Ruth Valentine and Con Karleen met, but it may have been as early as the 1920s. Con was born in 1904 in Nashua, Iowa, where his father was pastor of a Lutheran congregation. Con's father then took a church in Garvin, Minnesota, near Tracy, and Garvin was a town so small that there was no high school. So Con's parents farmed out their 4 boys to friends in Tracy so they could attend the schools there, coming home on weekends to be together as a family. Con deeply appreciated how his parents sacrificed so that he and his brothers could pursue higher education. 3 of the Karleen brothers became physicians, enjoying long and successful medical careers. Con never forgot his boyhood background and carried the small-town values of knowing and caring for one's neighbor into his medical work. Con's graduate studies included both dentistry and medicine, and after my father was called into the Army in 1940, Con practiced with Dr. Valentine for several years. In 1943, Con was called into the Army, and soon after was selected from a handful of Army doctors to be reschooled as a plastic surgeon, which was at the time a newly emerging specialty. Con did graduate work at Columbia in New York, and when released from the Army in 1947, he was ready to begin a new career in plastic surgery. His first position was with an established plastic surgeon, Dr. Carl Waldron, one of only 3 plastic surgeons in the Twin Cities at that time. By 1950, Con was eager to begin his own private practice and leased medical space in the Medical Arts Building in downtown Minneapolis, where he specialized in cleft palate and snowmobile accident cases until he retired. For many years, Con took the train once a month to Duluth and provided pro bono care for children who desperately needed expert cleft palate surgery. Con's wife, Ruth, was fully supportive in his demanding weekday schedule. A typical day began before 6 in the morning as Con visited his surgery patients in hospitals throughout the Twin Cities. Ruth was always up in the morning to send him on his way, and oftentimes provided coverage at his office when demands were high. Con and Ruth decided that the best way to have a reprieve from this nonstop calendar was to take several major trips a year, incorporating medical meetings with leisure and traveling with friends and colleagues. Their world travels included a number of trips to Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and to the wildlife refuge parks of Africa. Con and Ruth never had children, and so were actively devoted to their nephew Dave Perrin as well as to me. Con and Ruth energized each other, and their conversations were fast-paced, full of anecdotes and laughter. It was simply a joy to be in their presence and to hear their storytelling and perspectives on all kinds of topics. Most evident was their mutual commitment to find personalized medical care and what that meant to all kinds of people.